My name is Olivia Hayes, and for as long as I can remember, I've carried the weight of being called a burden. At every family gathering, every whispered comment behind closed doors, and every sharp glance across the dinner table, I was reminded that I was not enough. But what they never saw, what they never even bothered to ask, was the fire that grew inside me with every insult, the quiet determination to prove them wrong. This is not just a story about humiliation. It's a story about revenge dressed as success. And it all began with the night they laughed at me over Christmas dinner, never knowing that one day I would slide mortgage papers across the very same table and watch the shock on their faces as I claimed the house they once ruled over me. Christmas night was supposed to feel magical, but for me, it always carried a strange weight, like I was stepping into a performance where everyone else had a script except me. The house glowed with golden lights, the tree sparkled in the corner, and laughter bounced off the walls as though joy itself lived inside those walls. But under that noise, there was always the sharp edge of judgment. I sat at the table that night, the smell of roasted turkey and sweet pies swirling around me, but all I could think about was how invisible I felt. My siblings leaned into conversations about their jobs, their degrees, their future plans, while my parents smiled proudly at every word. Then their eyes would land on me, and that warmth vanished. The questions came, sharp and pointed. "So, Olivia, what exactly are you doing these days?" Their voices dripped with pity, as though they already knew the answer didn't measure up. I tried to hold my chin high, to answer in fragments that didn't betray my fears. But before I could even finish, my father chuckled and muttered the word that had branded itself across my entire childhood: burden. It slipped from his mouth so casually, like the word belonged to me, like it was my name. The table erupted in uneasy laughter, some pretending it was just a joke, others shifting uncomfortably, but no one defended me. No one ever did. In that moment, everything slowed down. The clinking of cutlery, the flicker of the candles, the way the cranberry sauce bled across the plate in front of me. My face burned, but I forced a smile, the kind of smile you wear when you refuse to let them see you break. Inside, though, I was breaking into 1,000 pieces. I thought of all the years I had heard that word, from schoolyard taunts to family fights where I was always the one blamed for not achieving enough, not shining bright enough. It felt like my entire existence had been reduced to a single, ugly label. And yet, beneath the humiliation, a quiet fire began to spark. I didn't argue back, didn't raise my voice, didn't slam my fork on the table as part of me wanted to. Instead, I sat silently, promising myself that this would be the last time I swallowed that word without a plan for revenge. As I looked around the table, I realized something. They believed their version of me was permanent. To them, I would always be the weak one, the dependent one, the daughter who would never amount to anything. That belief gave them comfort, superiority, and a story they could pass around like a piece of gossip. But what they didn't know, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that I was already working on something they couldn't take away from me. While they mocked, I had been saving, learning, and building in silence. In the folds of my coat, tucked away where no one could see, were papers that told a story very different from the one they painted. I didn't bring them out that night. No, that night wasn't for the reveal. That night was the seed. The moment I decided I would return not as the burden they branded me, but as the owner of everything they thought I'd never touch. When the dinner ended and the laughter moved to the living room, I slipped out quietly, letting the cold winter air wash over me as I walked to my car. The house behind me glowed, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I belonged inside it. Instead, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something much bigger, a story that was about to turn. They didn't know it yet, but I was done being their disappointment. I was going to become the storm that shattered their expectations. And one day, I would walk back into that same dining room, not with excuses or apologies, but with the kind of proof they couldn't laugh away. Mortgage papers signed in my name. That night, under the quiet snowfall, I swore to myself that I would never let their word define me again.
Writing. By the time I reached my late teens, I had learned to swallow the sharp edges of my parents' words. But there was only so much silence a person could carry before it started to burn from the inside. The breaking point came in my final year of high school. I had worked harder than ever, staying up late into the night, pushing myself through every assignment, desperate to prove that I could stand on the same level as my siblings. When the acceptance letters rolled in, my sister's envelope from her dream university was waved around the living room like a trophy. My brother's athletic scholarship earned him endless praise. And then there was me. I held an envelope in my trembling hands, the seal of a smaller but respectable college printed on the front. It wasn't an Ivy League school, but it was something I had earned through sleepless nights and relentless effort. I thought, just for once, they might look at me differently. I thought, maybe this time I had done enough. But when I showed them, my father's face fell flat, unimpressed. That's it? That's the best you could do? My mother didn't even bother to hide her disappointment. Olivia, do you realize how much this is going to cost us for so little return? My siblings exchanged glances, and that old familiar word came tumbling out again. Burden. It echoed through the room like a curse I couldn't escape. In that moment, something inside me cracked. I wanted to scream, to throw the letter in their faces, to tell them I wasn't worthless, but my throat closed and the words refused to come. Instead, I walked to my room, shut the door, and sank to the floor with tears streaming down my face. That night, for the first time, I felt like giving up. But grief has a strange way of turning into rage, and rage, if you let it, can harden into determination. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how tired I was of begging for their approval. That was when a thought struck me. What if I stopped trying to earn their validation altogether? What if I built something so undeniable, so real, that they couldn't laugh it away? I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but in the dark stillness of that night, I made a vow to myself that I would no longer live in their shadow. I would carve my own path, even if I had to do it alone. The breaking point didn't end with that night. It became the turning point. From then on, every cruel comment, every roll of their eyes, every dismissive laugh became fuel. I began studying more than just textbooks. I studied people, markets, business, anything that hinted at a world beyond the suffocating walls of that house. I started picking up part-time jobs, not just for the money, but to learn. I saved every dollar I could, hiding it away like it was gold. I began to see my parents differently too, not as giants towering over me, but as flawed people who were blind to the fire they had accidentally lit inside their own daughter. Looking back, I realized that without that breaking point, I might have lived forever chasing their approval, shrinking into their definition of me. But the word burden they loved to throw at me became my reason to rise. It was the insult that finally snapped me free from their grip. That night marked the death of the old Olivia, the girl who kept trying to please them, and the birth of the Olivia who would one day walk back into that same house with mortgage papers in her hands, smiling as they struggled to comprehend how wrong they had been. The years that followed were defined by silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of careful, deliberate work. I stopped wasting my breath arguing with my family because words had never changed their minds. Instead, I let their laughter and disapproval wash over me while I quietly built something they would never see coming. At first, it was small steps. I worked double shifts at a cafe, picked up tutoring jobs after school, and even started selling handmade crafts online. Every dollar mattered. While my siblings flaunted their new clothes, their trips, and their approval from my parents, I tucked my earnings away in an envelope hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk. It wasn't much in the beginning, but it was mine, and unlike the conditional support my parents gave, it couldn't be taken from me.
College was a battlefield of its own. With no real encouragement from home, I felt like an outsider, but I used that isolation as fuel. While my classmates wasted weekends partying, I sat in my dorm room teaching myself everything I could about finance, marketing, and real estate through free online courses. I read stories of self-made entrepreneurs late into the night, clinging to the belief that if they could climb out of nothing, then so could I. My professors began to notice my hunger. They offered me guidance, recommended me for internships, and gave me opportunities that became the stepping stones to something greater. Every small victory was a secret I kept from my family, choosing instead to let them continue believing I was barely getting by. What they didn't know was that I was carefully laying bricks for my future. By my third year of college, I had saved enough to make my first serious investment, a tiny, run-down apartment on the edge of town. It was all I could afford, and I knew my family would mock me if they found out. But I didn't buy it for their approval. I bought it because I saw potential where others saw decay. I spent months fixing it up with my own two hands, learning through trial and error, painting walls, replacing fixtures, and repairing floors until it became a place someone would want to live in. When I rented it out, the first check I received was small, but it was proof. Proof that I had turned their so-called burden into something that could carry me forward. The best part? They had no idea. To them, I was still the struggling child, the one they whispered about at family dinners, the one they pitied or mocked depending on their mood. And I let them believe it. I wore their dismissal like a cloak of invisibility, moving silently, steadily, and with purpose. Every time I returned home for holidays, I smiled and played the role they had written for me, while inside, I knew I was building an empire, brick by brick. My silence became my greatest weapon, and their blindness became my greatest advantage. Looking back, I realized how sweet that silence truly was. It was the cocoon where I transformed unseen and underestimated into someone stronger than even I believed possible. And while they sat at the dinner table, still calling me a burden, I knew that one day soon I would rip off that cloak of invisibility and show them just how powerful silence can be when it's filled with purpose.
Writing. The day I received my first significant payout felt like a crack of lightning splitting open the sky. It wasn't a fortune by any measure, just the combined rent from the two small properties I now managed. But to me, it was proof that I had taken control of my own life. For the first time, money didn't feel like a chain around my ankles. It felt like wings. I remember holding that check in my hands, staring at my name printed so boldly across it, and feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't just income, it was power, independence, and the first undeniable sign that I was no longer the burden my family had always branded me. It began with that first rundown apartment I had fixed myself. But once I saw the flow of steady rent, I didn't hesitate. I poured everything I had into acquiring a second property, even if it meant sleepless nights, scraping by on noodles, and walking miles to save on bus fare. My friends said I was crazy. Who sacrifices so much for peeling paint and broken tiles? But I could see beyond the present. I saw opportunity where others saw only decay. Every hammer swing, every coat of paint, every aching muscle was another brick in the foundation of my independence. Then came the moment that truly changed me. A tenant handed me cash in an envelope, thanking me for making their apartment livable, for giving them a place that felt like home. It was the first time someone had looked at me with gratitude instead of pity or disdain. I walked away that day with more than just money. I walked away with dignity. I realized that power wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about proving, to myself most of all, that I could carry the weight of my own life without asking permission from anyone. Still, I kept it all hidden from my family. At Christmas and Thanksgiving dinners, I sat quietly as they joked about how I was probably drowning in student loans or barely surviving on scraps. Their words stung, but they also sharpened me.
What they didn't know was that while they mocked me over turkey and mashed potatoes, I was building something bigger than their limited imaginations could comprehend. I smiled politely, letting their arrogance fuel the fire burning inside me. Every cruel remark became another deposit in my vault of motivation. With each rent check, I saved a little more, and with each investment, I grew bolder. The power I felt wasn't loud or boastful. It was steady, quiet, and undeniable. It was in the way I walked into the bank with confidence, the way real estate agents began to treat me with respect, and the way my professors started using my work as examples in class. I was no longer invisible. The girl they had once dismissed was slowly becoming a woman who controlled her own future. But here's the irony. My family still believed I was failing, and I let them. I wanted them to underestimate me, to keep calling me useless, to keep laughing at me during holiday dinners, because I knew the day would come when I wouldn't need to argue, explain, or defend myself. All I'd have to do was place a stack of papers on the table, the kind of papers that no insult could erase, and let the truth speak louder than any of their words ever had. That day wasn't here yet, but for the first time I could feel it approaching. The taste of power was on my tongue, and it was sweeter than anything I had ever known. Christmas has always been painted as a season of warmth, of togetherness, of families gathering around tables to share love. For me, it was a battlefield disguised in fairy lights. That year, as I walked through the door of my parents' house, the familiar smell of pine and roasted turkey wrapped around me, but it couldn't hide the coldness that lingered in their eyes when they looked at me. I carried a carefully wrapped gift from my niece, a smile rehearsed in the mirror, and a calmness that was brittle underneath. I had learned to armor myself with silence, but tonight, something felt different. Tonight, I wasn't just a guest at their table. I was a storm waiting to break. The evening started the same as always. Polite hellos, the rustle of wrapping paper, the clink of glasses. My siblings boasted about their promotions, their vacations, their picture-perfect lives. Every achievement was met with applause from my parents, every story showered with admiration. When the conversation inevitably turned to me, there was a pause, a silence so sharp it cut into me before anyone spoke. Then the familiar jokes began. My brothers smirked and asked if I had finally managed to pay my electric bill on time. My mother sighed loudly and muttered something about how she didn't know what would become of me. Laughter rippled around the table, each chuckle a reminder of the role they had assigned me. The burden, the failure, the one they could ridicule to feel better about themselves. For years, I had taken it quietly, swallowing the humiliation, waiting for the day I could answer without words. But that night, something in me cracked. I looked around at their smug faces, at the ornaments twinkling on the tree behind them, and I felt a surge of anger and clarity unlike anything I'd known before. I no longer felt small. I no longer felt powerless. I thought about the properties I owned, the tenants who relied on me, the accounts I had carefully built, and the independence I had carved out of stone. I thought about how much stronger I had become while they wasted their energy mocking me. "Do you know what it feels like?" I finally said, my voice low but steady, "to be the punchline of your own family?" The table fell silent, the laughter dying mid-breath. Eyes turned toward me, confused, almost offended that I dared to break character. "All these years, you've called me useless, a burden, a mistake. But you've never once asked me who I am, what I've built, or what I've fought through." My father shook his head dismissively, muttering about another dramatic outburst. But I didn't back down. For the first time, I looked each of them in the eye without flinching. There was no grand reveal that night. Not yet. The mortgage papers were still tucked safely in my bag, waiting for the perfect moment. Instead, this was the night I reclaimed my voice. The storm inside me finally broke free, not with screaming or tears, but with truth sharpened like glass. My words cut through their arrogance, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in their eyes, a pause, a hesitation. It was small, but it was enough. That Christmas dinner didn't end in hugs or reconciliation. It ended in silence, an awkward, heavy silence none of them knew how to break. They didn't know it yet, but the balance of power at that table had shifted forever. They had no idea that soon I would walk back into this very house with papers that would make their insults meaningless. But I knew, and for the first time, that was enough. It was the last Christmas they would ever laugh at me.
Writing. The next Christmas came faster than I expected, and with it, the weight of unfinished business. I had spent the year working harder than ever, expanding my small portfolio, saving, and planning for the moment that would change everything. By December, the mortgage was mine. The house where I had been belittled, dismissed, and broken down belonged, legally and entirely, to me. And as I walked up the front steps on Christmas Eve, the folder of papers tucked neatly under my arm, I felt no fear, only anticipation. Inside, the scene was the same as always. The tree glittered with ornaments, the air smelled of cinnamon and roast, and the familiar voices filled the living room with chatter. My siblings boasted about year-end bonuses and luxury gifts, while my parents beamed with pride. To them, I was still invisible, still the outsider who barely scraped by. They didn't even notice the folder in my hands. Not yet. Dinner began the same as it always had, with small talk, teasing, and then the slow shift toward me. My brother asked mockingly if I had finally figured out how to pay rent on time. My mother gave her a weary sigh, rehearsed like a tradition. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. I simply waited until the laughter peaked and the wine glasses clinked in celebration. Then I placed the folder on the table with a quiet, deliberate thud that cut through the noise like a drumbeat. "What's this?" my father asked, frowning as he reached for it. His fingers hesitated on the cover, sensing that something was different. I let the silence stretch, the air tightening with curiosity. Then I said evenly, "It's the mortgage, the deed to this house, paid in my name." The room fell into a silence so sharp it felt like the walls themselves were listening. My siblings stared, eyes wide, mouths half open. My mother's fork froze midway to her mouth. My father flipped through the pages, scanning the signatures, the seals, the undeniable truth that sat in black and white before him. The color drained from his face. For years, I had been the punchline. For years, they had mocked me, dismissed me, and stripped me of dignity. But in that moment, the power shifted so completely that none of them could speak. The house they sat in, the roof above their heads, the table where they had laughed at me, every brick, every wall, every square inch of it belonged to me now. "I am not your burden," I said quietly, my voice steady, firm. "I never was. You just never had the vision to see what I was building." No one dared to laugh this time. No one dared to speak. For the first time in my life, I had silenced the very people who had always silenced me. The taste of victory wasn't loud or vengeful. It was cold, sharp, and deeply satisfying. That night, the balance of power in my family was rewritten, and for the first time, I wasn't just sitting at the table. I was the one who owned it. The silence of that night stayed with me long after the laughter and clinking of cutlery faded. Walking away from my parents' house, the crisp December air cut through my coat, but inside I felt warmer than I ever had in their presence. For years, they had tried to convince me that I was nothing, a burden,
a failure, a shadow in a family of bright lights. And yet, I now owned the very roof over their heads. That knowledge wasn't just victory, it was liberation. In the days that followed, phone calls trickled in. My sister was the first. She spoke cautiously, her tone softer than I had ever heard. "Olivia, I didn't know," she said. Her voice wavered, as if she feared what I might say in return. My brother, proud and brash as always, didn't apologize, but sent me a text. "Well played." That was as close to an admission of defeat as I would ever get from him. My parents, however, remained silent, their absence in my phone log echoing louder than words. Owning the house gave me choices I had never dreamed of having before. I could move in, I could rent it, I could sell it, but the true power was in knowing I didn't need to use it. I visited one morning when the frost still clung to the windows, stepping through the front door alone. The place felt different. It wasn't haunted anymore. I stood in the dining room where years of humiliation had piled up like broken glass, and I felt no sting, no wound. Instead, I felt something close to peace. For the first time, I could look at those walls without feeling small. But freedom doesn't erase scars overnight. The whispers of their voices, the echo of their laughter, the weight of all the Christmas dinners where I was nothing more than a family joke, they lingered. And I realized something. Revenge wasn't the final chapter. Power wasn't just in proving them wrong, it was in proving myself right. I threw myself into my company, expanding it with the same quiet determination that had fueled me all those years. Every deal signed, every new hire, every milestone reached felt like another stone laid in the foundation of the life I was building, a life entirely my own. My office walls filled with photos not of family holidays, but of achievements, colleagues, and friends who had chosen me, not judged me. Slowly, I was creating a family I had always deserved, one that didn't measure worth by status, but by loyalty and kindness. Months later, when spring came, my parents finally called. My mother's voice cracked as she said, "Olivia, maybe you can come by for Sunday dinner?" It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was the closest thing to a bridge they had ever offered. I agreed, not out of need, but out of choice. When I walked into the house again, the air felt different, not because they had changed, but because I had. They could no longer control how I saw myself. The burden they had strapped onto my back had been lifted the night I slid those mortgage papers across the table. As I sat at the familiar dining room table, I noticed how careful their words were, how tentative their smiles became when they looked at me. Respect doesn't arrive with fireworks. It seeps in slowly, reshaping every interaction. I wasn't hungry for their approval anymore, but I could see they were starved for mine. That was the truest reversal of all. Over time, I learned to let go. Not for them, but for me. I forgave, not because they asked, but because carrying bitterness meant I was still carrying them with me, and I was done with that weight. The girl they once mocked, the burden they dismissed, had carved her own place in the world. I wasn't useless. I wasn't a failure. I was Olivia Hayes, and I had rewritten my story. The house still stands, a quiet monument to a battle fought and won. Every brick holds a memory of pain, but now it also holds my triumph. Sometimes when I walk past it, I smile, not because I own it, but because I own myself. And that, more than any deed or mortgage, is the sweetest victory of all.